This is the Movie Theater Butter Podcast, where we talk about stories made into movies and what was modified for the big screen. As a warning, this episode will discuss the plot of both the movie and its original source material, so be ready for spoilers. I'm your host, Kim Labick, and I hope you enjoy the show. Hello, listeners. May thy knife chip and shatter, and may thy corn pop. Yes, yeah.
Oh, man.
That's what I could think of for this one. Anyways, today we are sinking our claws into one of the most popular and epic works of science fiction ever brought to the big screen, Dune Part One.
Yeah.
We're mostly talking about the new one, the 2021 version. You may have heard of the 1984 movie directed by David Lynch. We're going to be touching on that a bit in this episode. Tawny, I don't know if you've seen it, but I just watched it last night and I have some thoughts. So we'll dive in a little bit to that because it's the first real adaptation of the story. And, you know, what better way to talk about the differences between the original medium and the film than to also tack on some of the sort of first film adaptation. So Dune Part One came out in 2021, as we said, nearly 40 years after the David Lynch version. The first book, written by Frank Herbert, came out in 1965. Since then, a lot has changed, and yet humanity has stood pretty damn still.
True.
Here to comment is one of my best friends and a huge fan of the series, Tawny Tran. How are you, Tawny?
Oh, I'm good. You know, just waiting for part 2 to come out. So it's a good timing and anticipation for the rest of Dune. Since it's a pretty huge book, a lot of shit happens. So I'm excited to get more into it for sure.
A starting note for anybody who's listening, you probably already know this, but let me mention it again. Dune Part One, again, it being Part One, it's about the first half of the first book. The 1984 film, the David Lynch version, tells the story of the whole book. As much as possible, we're going to avoid spoilers past the first new Dune film.
Yep.
Okay.
It's going to be hard.
Yeah, because there's so much interesting stuff in this whole world.
Yeah.
Okay. 2 major disclaimers that I want to say about this film and about this story. 1, Dune is just Avatar. That needs to be said. Dune is just Avatar. Think about it. Think about it. You're shaking your head. Think about it. The second disclaimer is that the series is famously influenced by and heavily appropriating the Islamic religion and Middle Eastern culture. Even many of the created terms for the Dune series are directly derived from or inspired by the Arabic language. But I want to say that I'm not the best person to speak on that aspect of the story and how it relates to Islam and Middle Eastern culture because I'm a white American woman who is not Muslim. But I do want to take a second to remind our listeners and recommend them look more into the cultural influences from reputable sources that are Middle Eastern and or Muslim voices. This podcast is purely about films and story adaptations, and I don't know enough to dive deep into that. So I don't want to be sitting here telling people oh yeah, this is directly based on this and this means that, and just be butchering the whole thing. So let's start off, as we almost always do, with a favorite quote. I was going to come with a favorite quote from Dune Part 1, but because I watched the 84 movie last night and it was just such a wild ride, I found 2 really great quotes that I brought.
Give it to me.
Okay, so Paul has a line in the 1984 movie where he says, "Things have been so serious here lately." It's early on when clearly everybody's like, "Hey guys, there's so much politics," and they're trying to kind of warn Paul to keep an eye out. And he just goes, "Things have been so serious here lately." And I'm like, that's so obvious, but yes, you're right. I don't know. And it's so funny too because Dune Part 1, the current film that we have, is literally so serious. It is so constantly epic drama. There's no respite. There's no little touch of humor here and there. So yes, things have been so serious here lately. It's just one of my favorite quotes. And then the other one, because I finally got a reference of something, because I finally watched this film, I finally connected to things that have been referenced in other media. So there's a quote where the Baron says, "He who controls the spice controls the universe." And I finally got that was, well, not that was a reference to Rick and Morty, but that Rick and Morty referenced this Because they have like,
Yeah.
there's a famous episode in Rick and Morty where somebody in the background screams, "He who controls the pants controls the universe."
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, that's just a silly little thing. And I didn't know it was like directly.
There's that, and then the spice must flow is a big one.
Yes.
That's definitely a meme material that's been around for a long time. My sisters and I used to joke about that all the time. But yeah, that's a good one.
I loved it. There were a lot of good quotes in that. That was a beautifully silly movie.
Yeah, a lot of it's been a long time since I've seen it, but I remember having that DVD copy, growing up, and that was just one of the DVDs on there, and it's just funny because like everyone's white in that movie. The costume design is just absurd.
Yeah.
Like everything that happens in there, there's always something that catches your eye that kind of takes you out of the movie, and I think that's just because it's outdated, but ambitious. You have to give that to David Lynch. But it's a good thing to note that there was also a TV series that I think Sci-Fi had done.
Oh, look at me not doing my research for this podcast. Tell me about it.
That's the one I remember the most, but we can talk about that later. But my quotes are a little bit more serious because I grew up reading the books. I got up to God Emperor of Dune, which is, I think, the 4th book.
Nice.
Because after that, it kind of just got very... I don't even know how to describe it. It just got so convoluted, and, like, it's not really about characters anymore. It's more about, like... It just got very internal. Whoever the main character was, I think it was... later, who... I'm not going to tell you spoilers, but it's basically when he basically becomes a god, and it becomes, like, this omnipotent being and stuff like that. So it's a lot of that kind of perspective. But I remember, I think this was said in the movie, but I don't know if it's the same person that says it in the book. But I remember the mystery of life isn't a problem to solve, but a reality to experience. And like, for me, that's just what the whole theme of Dune is. It's about mankind kind of evolving, the whole cycle of rebirth and stuff like that. So that was one of my favorite ones. I do remember that one pretty clearly. I just don't remember who said it. I want to say Paul said it, but I think in the movie, the dude that he kills in the Chris knife fight is the one who says it, but in like his prescient visions that he has, where like he had a friendship with him in some parallel universe or whatever. But that's a good one, and obviously I do love the Fear Litany. That's Bene Gesserit. It's like one of their big mottos that they learn when they start learning the weirding way and all that stuff. But yeah, those are two of my favorite ones for sure. I definitely want to get the Fear Litany as a tattoo one day.
Yes.
I feel like everybody does that.
Yeah, but do it. I have a palm tree tattoo. It's like very obvious and it's super basic, but get it.
I don't know. It's just it's just something that I think all of us want to say to ourselves, but like it's really hard to sometimes. Kind of accepting that fear is like a big part of your life, and that even though it feels like it's a bad thing, it's like the same feeling as regrets. Like you might not regret something, but you're glad that it happened, otherwise you wouldn't have learned from it. Yeah, there's a lot of this. Dune is very like personal, but also at the same time tells a very big story. That's what I love about it, is that it can be relatable in some instances, but I love that it's very human based. Like the technology isn't what makes humans evolve, it's humans that, evolve themselves.
Yeah. Dang, that was really well said. Really nice. All right, so let's kind of dive into, the meat of it all. Or not, I don't want to say that. Let me say that again because that was gross. Let me dive into the ground beef of it all.
Gross.
All right, so let's kind of dive into it. I already mentioned that Dune Part One gets through about half of the first Dune book. And again, as much as possible, we're going to try not to spoil anything past that. If there is anything huge, I will edit it out or give it a big bleep or whatever so that our listeners can kind of focus in. Because for me, like, I didn't have enough of this knowledge to...
So you came in blind, kind of?
Yeah,
sort of?
Exactly. Like, I didn't know anything past Dune Part 1. I read the book. I actually only read, like, a third of the book anyways, the first time I read it. And... so I guess what I'm saying is I avoided spoilers somehow miraculously, and I hope to have an influence on helping other people avoid spoilers. Yeah.
It's one of those series that's wasn't super popular at first, but obviously has gained a following, and it's like I feel like it's one of those series that like you either like it or you don't,
Mm-hmm.
and that's totally fine. But it's just so notoriously hard to adapt and has been since the first movie that they tried to make. So
Mm-hmm.
I don't really exactly know why that is. I think it's a very specific genre that I don't think a lot of, whether it's TV or books or stuff like that, have like explored. So I think that's why it was so ahead of its time for what 1965 you said?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just notoriously so hard to get into, and not just because of his writing style, which I can understand why you didn't finish the book, because it's very like, it's got this omniscient style to it, but you can understand sort of like there's like 6 perspectives in one chapter, because it's like anyone who's in the room at the time, you know what they're thinking, and that can be a little jarring. But I remember that being a particularly hard read the first time, and I was like 12 or something like that. So I can imagine a lot of people not finishing or not liking it on their first read, for sure.
Yeah. It's very heavy. And especially something I talk about with this book is you dive straight into the world. Like there's sort of no mercy for not understanding who the Bene Gesserit are, what the planet Caladan is and its significance, what all these different houses are. I think when you dive into a sci-fi book, and especially like an adult sci-fi book, there is a certain level of, that there will be a learning curve. There are things you need to learn about. But Dune specifically is just so heavy with it. I mean, it's unforgiving in a way. And so I think that's very hard to get through at first. But once you do have that background, once you understand the world, it's smooth sailing, but it's hard to get over that first. And I think that's part of the reason why when it comes to the film, the 2021 film, they chose to split it into 2. I mean, Denis, he's very open about the fact that the first one is very exposition heavy because it has to be. Like even watching that film, even if I didn't have any background on Dune at all, if I knew absolutely nothing about it, watching that first film is already kind of tough, because you're trying to follow like, okay, who's this person? Why are they wearing this like cultural thing, and what does that mean to them? And why is his mom making Timothée Chalamet yell at him for a glass of water? Like you're trying to understand so much, and then you're thrown into it.
Well, what I really respect about Denis is that he, for sure, like in behind the scenes, he legit was like, I literally had the book with me at all times, and that's how we just referenced the book. If there was something that we had a question about on how to approach a certain shot or a certain story point, I would go back to the book, which I was ecstatic to hear about that, because as much as the David Lynch and the TV series were okay adaptations, to me it didn't feel like they were true to the book. There are plot points that they do cover, but there are a lot of like, I don't know, I just feel like even just down to the costuming really can take you in and out of a movie. So like the TV series and the David Lynch one obviously have outrageous costumes that just feel like, I don't know, like if there was a really bad science convention, like in Galaxy Quest.
Yeah.
You know what I'm talking about? Like if they had really bad like sci-fi costumes, that's the vibe I'm getting. But for this one, it's very like, I don't know, minimalistic, like sci-fi, but it's not super advanced and not super chromy. It's just very weirdly down to earth, but not junkyard specific, like Star Wars. So I really respect Denis for really trying to hone in on the true sci-fi vibe of it without it feeling like you like needed to know everything. So you're right. I think the exposition for the first part was a smart idea, not just to bring in an audience that was familiar with Dune, but also for people like you who have never read it or really don't have any, information about it. So I think it was a smart way to bring in people who don't know. Yeah. But again, I can still understand the confusion because there's a lot. Okay, there's like 6 different. They touch on like the Spacing Guild like once, and there's like 6 other organizations that are also in the works, and I think that's gonna be a big part if they do continue the movie series. But they barely scratch the surface. Like,
yeah. And I will say, as far as the adaptations that I'm aware of, and let me know if the TV show does more, but I do think Dune Part One, the 2021, is like the most loyal adaptation that we have so far.
Yeah, I would agree with that. For sure.
Hell yeah. Good job, Denny. You did it.
Yeah, he did it. I mean, even just watching like his previous stuff, like Arrival, is just like,
Yeah.
I don't think I read the book for that, but I feel like I don't need to, because I think he just really, truly understands how to represent the human condition in a sci-fi world. Like, he's very, very good at capturing that vibe without alienating you, but at the same time doing just that, because it is a brand new world, and this hasn't been redone since the TV series. Which I'll also mention, there was a movie, like a TV movie after that for Children of Dune with James McAvoy.
Oh, yeah? Okay. Ooh, James McAvoy.
So if you really want to go down that Dune rabbit hole, I would try giving the TV series a try, even though it's like very outdated. But I think it's better than the David Lynch one. That's the one I remember growing up with. I remember watching that on TV and then getting the DVD pack for that.
So going back to exposition for a second, while we were talking about, there's a lot to kind of understand before you can really get into the story. One of my favorite things is like, okay, so I opened this up on HBO Max and I was like, okay, I know it's going to be a little bit different. I know it's going to be very 80s, whatever. It immediately opens on Princess Irulan staring into our souls the whole time. Like, she doesn't blink, but she gives some genuinely helpful exposition. She's like, hey guys, there's a planet called Arrakis. It has spice. Spice is important. Emperor like spice. Emperor no like Paul. Like, basically she like spills it all out for you. And I'm like, that's great. That kind of helps you get into it. Especially at a time like in the 80s, you're way less likely to know anything about this book going into this film.
Yeah.
So that was cool. And then, of course we have beautiful opening credits over images of golden sand dunes that I think we should have brought back for this movie. I think we could have done with some beautiful sand dune opening credits.
Like color palette wise or like shot wise?
Oh, like shot wise. It's just like these like classic, and then you fade from one video of a dune to another video of a dune with like credits.
Did they not do that for 2021? I feel like they did.
I don't think so. I mean, it's been a minute since I watched it fully. I think I did watch it about a week ago, but I wasn't fully paying attention.
Yeah, I feel like, not that dunes aren't present in 2021, because they are, but if that's a better way you think, then for sure. Yeah, I mean, it's definitely not lost on us in the new adaptation. But it's weird that it opens with Irulan, though.
Yeah.
Because
she's not really important to... I mean, this is not too terribly much of a spoiler. If you've seen Dune Part One, you haven't even seen Irulan. So you can already tell, at least to some extent, she's not as important as many of the other main characters if she's not, like, in the first half of the story.
It's Chani that opens up Dune 2021, I remember, because she's like, this is my planet, and here's the Fremen, and we've been under the Harkonnen rule and stuff like that. So, which I think, in my opinion, is a little bit better because it ties you to the planet first. But for Irulan, you don't even get her until the second half of Dune. And even then, she's more prevalent in Dune Messiah and Children of Dune. So that's a really interesting take. But I think that's just because David Lynch was like, I gotta do this whole fucking book in one movie. Like, what's the running time for that? Do you know?
Ooh, for the 84?
Yeah.
2 hours and 17 minutes. Okay, it was decent.
That's pretty long for a 1980 movie, for sure.
You can't really go longer than that at that point, because in the 80s you still had like VHS. You'd have to give them 2 VHSs like with Titanic.
Which is why I also love the 2021 version, and it didn't feel long to me for some reason. And I know for a lot of people that's not true. A lot of people were like, this was like so long and so boring, and I'm like, I don't know what you're talking about. It felt great to me, and it was a great version of doing exposition without making you like roll your eyes or like, I don't know, make you question what's going on. But yeah, that's pretty long for an 80s movie.
I also, on that note though, I would say I have such a rant about film runtimes, and specifically it's like the anti-rant to everybody else's rant about film runtimes. Not to be very like, I'm not like the other people who complain about movies, but on this specific thing, yes, there are movies that are excessively long. Martin Scorsese, I'm looking at you. You really got to lean on your editor more, okay? Just like knock it down. Avatar, you got to knock it down.
So long.
Yeah. There are some movies like that are overly long and that really need to kind of cut it down to get more of the meat of the story in there. But I think there are many movies that linger around the sort of 2-hour mark that people will complain about. And I think it's not right because films have never been one set runtime. Like, it's never going to be like an hour and a half on the dot every time kind of thing. We are so used to streaming TV in a way that each episode is of a certain length. So you're like kind of trained mentally to be like, yes, this is when it cuts off. This is when, so like even your mind gets used to the timing of like, it's going to end soon. But film is different. And every story is different. And especially when it comes to something like an adaptation, you might be adapting a book like the first Harry Potter book, which is objectively quite short. And, you can definitely fill out a whole film with that because you can really get into it and really let things breathe, et cetera, et cetera. But when you have a longer source of, your original story, it's going to be harder. You either are going to cut a lot of corners and make people mad and risk your movie being terrible, or you're going to find a way to balance it while still giving, a hefty amount of the story. So not even just for film adaptations, I could go further into like all of the original films that I think are deserving of being their length, but are all too often criticized for being quote unquote too long. But I digress. I don't want to get too heavy into that. But I will say, as we're again talking about the 84, yes, for the 80s, 2 hours and 17 minutes is long. Specifically because, again, like that's the time of VHS. We didn't even have DVDs yet. So when you're considering runtime, it's literally how much is going to fit on the physical media that people are going to buy and take home.
I can't even imagine how big that roll would have been.
Yeah, right?
Like that film roll. Oh my god. But yeah, it looks like the 2021 version is about 2 hours and 40 minutes. And to compare that with Harry Potter, what you were saying, it says it's 160 minutes, so just under that. So people pretend like they understand how films get made in terms of like, oh, they just fluffed it up or whatever. And it's like, I don't think you understand how intricate each shot is done. Therefore, they understand like how it'll affect post and like, is this something that's going to be a behind the scenes thing or is this a deleted scene thing? Mm-hmm. But I don't think they understand the intricacies of like how much they think about running time or how much pressure or stress that they're under to try to get a certain time for sure. But what do you think about having Sting in the 1984 version?
Sting. Oh, was he the scary ginger kid?
Yeah, I think he was Fade.
Yes, scary ginger kid. I forget some of the names sometimes. Again, because it's a very heavy world.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm not super familiar with Sting. I should be. I really should be. Like, I love classic rock. I love a lot of that time period of music. So I should be a lot more knowledgeable about Sting. At least, like, I know his face. He was great. That character was accurately scary. And he was just, like, he was the epitome of like scary, privileged guy who's just also kind of a fucking creep.
Yeah, that's his whole shtick, and that's been a thing in all of the adaptations, that he's just this really weird, creepy dude. Mm-hmm. And like comparing him to who's the new one, Austin Butler.
Austin Butler, yeah.
We'll see. It is kind of weird seeing him without hair. So
yeah, it's also just I think the character designs of the Harkonnens, or actually, let me stop for a second. Harkonnen or Harkonnen? Discuss.
I guess you won't really know unless you actually do the research on it. I don't know. I always said Harkonnen.
It feels right. That feels right.
Yeah. I don't know. There's a lot of terms and stuff that I think that was the only downside of this of all the adaptations, is not knowing what some of these terms mean that he made up. Mm-hmm. Because Andre is also the same as you. He didn't know much about Dune or had any concept of what it's even about. And he was like, yeah, it was a good movie. And then when we watch it again with subtitles and like the term Kwisatz Haderach is like the next Jesus Christ, basically. Mm-hmm. He was like, oh, I didn't know what that meant. And that was something that was whispered into the sound design. And I didn't know that either until we watched it with subtitles. And I was like, oh, okay. That's what was going on there. So it's like, there's definitely a lot of things that can go over your head. Not just this new adaptation, but with all of them, for sure. That can get a little confusing.
Yeah. Something else that was confusing, and this was an 84 thing, but I need to ask you, because you know more about the story in general, and you have read the books more so than I have. In 84, the first real scene that happens is they're at a ball, basically, in the Emperor's planet, on the Emperor. Or not really at a ball, but they're in like this palace throne room sort of thing on the Emperor's planet. And the Emperor is there. And then this big bad guy enters in this giant black tube almost. It like almost looks like a chunk of a train. It's like this giant black thing that like enters through into the throne room. And then the windows open and it's like a tank for this very scary, creepy, I don't want to say worm because worm means something different in Dune. But he's almost like if you took a fetus and a fish and you meshed them together, that's what this person looked like. And I don't know what this person's name was. All I know is it was very clearly a big bad guy.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe this is a spoiler alert for the current Dune series, but it's already happened in 84. He is clearly a big bad guy because he lays the whole plan out before the Emperor. He's like, Emperor, you do all this. And the Emperor's like, yes, of course, big bad guy. Do you have any idea, like, do you think that could be a certain character that you know of in the series?
I know that him and the Baron obviously are plotting together. Because basically Paul's dad becomes like this upcoming popular name that everyone's basically liking. So the Emperor's like, he's just plotting with Harkonnen. Mm-hmm. But I'm not sure. I'll have to rewatch it because it's been so long. But it's so hard for me to watch that movie.
Yeah,
it's like the opening scene. There's just a black mask he's talking to.
It's
basically
the opening scene. Yeah, it's like a big. It's like the size of like a tray. Yeah. Did you like Google it?
I know what you're that's the Spacing Guild.
That's the okay.
Yeah, so that's basically they are in charge of space travel. So they have the big monopoly of using the spice basically is what allows humans to do space travel and to like have longer lives and stuff like that. Yeah, so I think that's the Spacing Guild.
Okay. That would make sense.
Because they obviously rely on the spice and that's just the big thing that turns the cogs on the wheel, pretty much.
Yeah.
A fetus and a fish. I was like, what are you talking about?
I know, but doesn't the visual kind of make sense when you look at that picture?
Yeah.
Thank you.
I just saw it. I was like, oh, okay.
God, I love like 80s sci-fi production design. And when they do puppets like this and that kind of thing, so good. Sometimes I want to be that person who says, like, they don't make them like they used to. But I know that there are a lot of budget limitations when it comes to that kind of stuff nowadays. Like, we could get into this for a second. And we don't have to, like, super dive into it. But just when people talk about, again, stuff that they don't know about the film industry. You and I work in the film industry. We know it. We have the experience. We're living it every day. When it comes to production design and even sometimes like costume design, etc., there are things that I think so many productions nowadays look worse in these departments, and people are pointing that out and being like, oh my gosh, how are some movies worse and why are they looking worse, blah, blah, blah. And I totally understand that. I think we need to sort of attack the right people when it comes to that, because it is not the fault of production designers. It is not the fault of costume designers, of hair and makeup, etc., etc. It is not the fault of those people. Those people are incredibly talented. The problem is that budgets become so limited, and that kind of is just where some of the problem lies, as people will be like, oh, hair and makeup doesn't need that much money, cut down people, cut down stuff, we'll just do some of the CGI. So I think we need to kind of be attacking the right people when we talk about that.
Yeah, 100%. I don't know, that's why I love the new adaptation, because I feel like there is such care put into every department.
Yeah.
And that must have been from Denny. And he's like that, I think, with all of his... Obviously, I haven't worked with him, so I don't know what his managing style is or how he delegates stuff. But I assume that things are all on the same page because of him, whether that is editing or cinematography or costuming and stuff like that. So that's why I think I really enjoyed it, because it just seemed cohesive.
Yeah, 100%. It felt right. Again, even me not knowing too much about Dune, going into a Dune film, I have a certain level of expectations of how I'm going to feel in that movie and what that movie is going to look like. And it very much meets and I think exceeds expectations for what you want this film to be.
Yeah. And I can understand people still not even liking Dune after this, because it's such a I don't know, it's a very foreign type of sci-fi that we don't see all the time. Like, we're so used to, like, Star Wars and space battles and stuff like that.
And like there's one good guy and there's one bad guy and the good guy
Yeah.
must defeat the bad guy. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that one of the bigger themes with Dune is all about heroism, and I think that's one of the big things that I think Frank Herbert really wanted to focus on, was having, like, exploring how heroism is a good and a bad thing, and the kind of syndrome and consequences that can come from it. And that's not just because of Paul. I think everyone, like, most of the main characters have some kind of ties to that hero theme, because they each sort of have their own piece of the pie in this whole epic series. It's not just about Paul, obviously, which you'll go more into if they do continue the series, because with Dune Messiah, there's this whole section about Paul and stuff like that. So it's like, it's just a huge theme, and I think that this is a really good example of an origin story, which I think a lot of people don't really care about. Because, like, I read a lot of books, obviously, and I think a lot of times there are books that we don't finish because we're just like, oh my god, this is the origin story, it's so long and so boring. But, like, this is a perfect example of, like, how to set that up and to kind of just branch off from there. But there's so many factors that go into this story that, like, I don't think it's possible unless you're gonna make 10 3-hour long episodes, you know what I mean? So,
And maybe they will, but
maybe
we'll see.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
I love that we're talking about sort of the complex heroism, because I've seen these two films. I've read a chunk of the first book. I have enough of a background starting the story, and very clearly in all of these iterations, even in the 84, but especially in the 2021, you feel that clearly they're pushing Paul to be, this like Jesus Christ type figure, this religious savior figure, but also within that you can feel and you can see that it's dangerous, that they're not taking it as like, you are the next amazing person and therefore you can do no wrong and everything's going to be fine. There's clearly tension. They're really clearly trying to say, like, yes, this is going to be like a savior complex story, but keep in mind that it's complex. Like, it's not just that Paul lands on this planet and is a perfect person and does everything perfectly. Yeah. They're planting the seeds of this leads to a lot more than you and he thinks it will.
Yeah. Yeah, and Frank Herbert's really good at foreshadowing. Like, that's, like, one of the big writing tools that he uses. And he sneaks it in there, obviously, because the way he writes is very omniscient, and, like, you kind of understand the thoughts of everybody that's in the scene at the time. But him and prescience and precognition stuff is such a big, like, contributing factor to everything, whether that's, like, and that affects everything in film, like how something's shot, how VFX affects that, even down to just, like, costuming and set design. But what I think is very interesting is Denis really does stick to, like, the human face and giving a lot of empathy towards the character that's on screen. But yeah, it's very, very well done.
Yeah.
In the best way, without, again, overwhelming anyone who's watching. Yeah.
Absolutely.
There's so much.
There's one major kind of criticism that I have on the first Dune movie, Dune Part One.
Yeah, give it to me.
And then there's a very stupid criticism that I have on it. So let me give you the major important one, and then we'll get to the dumb one. Actually, no. In the words of Willy Wonka, scratch that, reverse it. I'm going to start with the stupid one. So in the 1984 Dune movie, you guys, the Baron flies. The Baron frickin' flies, and it's so ridiculous, and I love it.
It's in all of the adaptations too. Like,
yeah, okay, yes. But on that note, so the 2021, I don't like when he flies. The first time we see him fly is it's like, the lady from the Bene Gesserit visits. She's like, hey, don't kill Paul or Jessica. And the Baron's like, I totally won't kill Paul or Jessica. And then she leaves and he's like, ha ha ha, I'm a bad guy. And then he's like, ha ha ha, and he like flies very dramatically and epically in the air. But his robe is like really tall. So it like
Oh, long?
yeah, it's like really long, so it still reaches the bottom, the floor. And I'm just like,
Yeah.
it's kind of confused on that. I don't know.
Is he
That
a
didn't
long
hit
body?
for me. Yeah.
Is he a worm?
Is he a worm? Is he the spice?
That's a thing in all of the adaptations. I think it's weirdest in the 1984. He's just like
He's like
got this weird body. Yeah, well, this weird bodysuit that's like it looks like a straitjacket kind of thing,
Yeah.
if I remember correctly. In the TV series, he's like always wearing red. I think the Harkonnens have like a red theme or something like that. But he's also in like this like weird. He's in a chair. I think in the TV series, it's like this flat. Imagine like the bottom of a sphere that's cut. So it's like there's a disc and then like a backing
Yes.
on the chair. So I think that's what he's sitting in the TV series. And this one, it just seems like technology, I guess.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's like a happy medium of the two, but I can understand the confusion when you were like, does he have like a weird ass body or is it like
Yeah, I was like, is he just really tall?
yeah, that's the funny criticism. What's the serious one?
Okay, so the serious one is, I mean, and this is something we've all said, and this is something that goes a little bit back to my disclaimer of listen to other people who have a better grasp of this situation. Just Dune 2021 still has like a ton of white people for something that is very clearly,
Yeah.
you know, meant to not be white people, not fully white people. And especially when we get to the sequel, which is coming out very soon, but we haven't seen yet. I don't know enough about. But, you know, when they introduce like, oh, and there's a bunch of new cast members, and then almost all the new cast members are still white people.
So I think I think that's a partly because of separating, one, I think it's a story element to separate Royal from literally everybody else in the universe, but two, I think it's also a publicity thing. Because all the main characters are celebrities that are really hot right now. So you have, you know, Florence Pugh, Austin Butler, Anya Taylor-Joy's in this listed as credits. I don't know who she is. I have a guess, but I understand like how that can come across as a little culturally blind. There's a different
more,
you know,
more
like
cultural appropriation in a sense.
Yeah. So I also think that because we haven't gotten into more Fremen. Like, we haven't gotten to their sieges, and we haven't understood or looked at their culture. Because I think the POCs would be, Zendaya, Javier Bardem, Jamis, the one who he killed in the Cryptonite fight. So I think we just haven't been exposed to the Fremen culture, but I think the whole having more of a white cast, I think, is a publicity thing. And
Yeah. Which is in itself part of the problem. And this is a problem we talk about all the time. This is a problem in general people who work in the industry talk about all the time. And we are so slowly but surely getting better about just like accurate casting when it comes to that sort of thing. And also just having people in the room who are not just the same white people with the same perspectives. You know, again, this movie does a little bit better than the 84. Definitely better than the 84. Everyone in the 84 was white.
Yeah, I mean, even just seeing that Zendaya was in the cast, I was like, oh, okay. So that they're dipping their toes into something that, you know, if you live on a planet, I'm sorry, but like a desert planet, your skin's going to be a little darker.
Yeah, and your eyes are going to be blue on blue because spice.
Yeah. Well, the blue thing is, I know this for a fact that he was just inspired, I think, by magic mushrooms. I don't know if Frank Herbert actually did magic mushrooms, but I think, isn't like psilocybin blue or something like that? There's like a blue mushroom. Anyways, the whole
blue mushroom
inspiration, I think that's the inspiration for the blue eyes. I have gone down like Dune rabbit holes, and that's one of the things that I've discovered, like when he's looking at his like list of inspirations and things like that.
That Frank Herbert did mushrooms?
Maybe.
Maybe. It was the 60s.
I just know that he was inspired by like the precog stuff, the Bene Gesserit, like Paul having visions and stuff like that. That has to be.
Oh, yeah.
Has to be inspired by that. But it is very interesting for the time, for sure. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it was because of that, but we can definitely research that for sure.
Yeah.
I just remember looking that up a long time ago and being like, oh, okay, that makes a lot of sense. And that's obviously 1970s and...
Mm-hmm. It was the time of the season, shall we say. So also, this is another quick 84 note. I know I feel like I'm talking a little bit more about the 84 movie than the 2021. But there's a pug dog in the 1984 movie for like no reason. Paul has a dog and it's a pug, and it's so like out of place to me.
Uh-huh.
It's crazy. And there's not a dog in the book. There's not a dog in the story. And there's not a dog in the 2021 film. But just out of nowhere in the 84 movie, there's a pug.
That's so funny because, like, you don't think of a pug as, like, a royal thing.
Yeah, or like a space kind of dog. Like, if I was going to think of like a space kind of dog, I don't know. Maybe it would be like a corgi.
Also, like, the themes in there don't match with a pug. If we're being serious, if you really want me to pick a dog,
Pick a dog.
Like the whole Bene Gesserit thing is like elevating mankind, obviously through woman power, but like the whole human evolution thing, and like with Mentats and the like Tleilaxu thing, which that's not even mentioned in Dune either, but that's a whole big thing. That doesn't make sense. A pug is the most inbred dog.
But maybe that's why it makes sense. Maybe David Lynch was trying to tell us something. Maybe David Lynch was trying to be like, hey, you know what? Pug dogs are a crazy miracle of dog inbreeding.
They're not, though.
They're not. They have a lot of health issues. And
yeah, God.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think, what's a good water dog? Because of his planet's a water planet.
Oh, yeah. My
Labs?
first thought was like a golden retriever, like classic, because they just love going in water.
I don't know what the significance of that. Maybe David Lynch has some secret thread that he put in there, because that dude is all about weaving threads that no one understands.
Yeah, there's something there, and we'll find out, eventually.
So this was 84, was Blade Runner around that time too, 1980 something.
Yeah, 80s. It was, if I had to guess, I'm not even going to look it up. I'm going to guess 87.
Let me see. I think it was... Hold on. Blade Runner 1982.
Oh, okay. Damn, I was
early.
Way off.
So, because I remember the costuming looks a little similar to the 1984 Dune. Like the costuming where it's kind of like shiny leathers, and yeah, I'm looking at
all sci-fi's in like the 80s and and also
hair.
like late 70s. Yeah, had a very distinct look of like, this is definitely what the distant future is going to be like, guys.
Yeah, I'm not privy to like how the set deck and set design is on the old Dune movie, but for the Blade Runner, yeah, I remember that being super extensive, but I don't know.
So I have a sort of question, I guess, for you on the 2021 Dune Part One film and what you think, just as far as this goes, like a story point. So the guy who betrays House Atreides, the traitor, he has this really cool, not cool because he basically is at fault for killing the Duke, but
yeah,
decently interesting scene where he, he like attacks him, and then he like sits down and like very honestly talks to him and is like, hey, Duke, you're not going to die yet, but you're probably definitely going to die. Here's what's up. And he like just lays it all out for him, which I think is already really fascinating and is very clearly a sign of respect that this character, although he's committing a terrible thing, at the very least respects him enough to give him this information and to like let him know and to also let him know like, I'm still trying to help Jessica and Paul. But I wonder, and this might be better explained in the book, but I wonder, he had to have known that he was going to be killed. Not the Duke, but the traitor guy. He had to have known that the Baron was going to kill him. I mean, if big bad guy Baron steals your wife and says, hey, I need you to go commit like a royal assassination and let me come and attack the whole thing. Like, you gotta have known that you go back there, even if you do it or you don't do it, he's gonna kill you.
So, pretty simple, honestly. I think it's just if you're gonna do anything for the person that you love.
Yeah.
If I remember correctly from the book and the movie, I think that the Baron had killed her already, if I'm not mistaken. So, he should have anticipated that instead of assuming that the Duke's gonna kill him. He should have assumed that he had killed his wife already.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's just a simple the whole dilemma of, do you do anything for the person that you love, or do you what outweighs your loyalty, I guess.
Or even just, I think there could be a lot more discussed about the fact that he was responsible for so many deaths, trying to quote unquote save his wife. I mean, like, how that's a complicated, that could be, I would explore that story in and of itself. I would really explore a story about him and his wife and all that, because straight up, like, it's a minor plot point which still makes a lot of sense and moves the narrative forward, but dude, you did a really bad thing. No, but, if someone steals your wife and says, I need you to fully almost kill a duke and bring him to
and his
me
whole family.
and
Yeah.
his whole family and take down the shields so that me and my guys can come in and kill a whole bunch of people. Like,
Yeah.
that's a terrible thing.
Yeah, but imagine you're just this doctor. You're just a doctor. You're not a person of importance, and I think if you're not royal, then you're basically considered cannon fodder, even if you are loyal to a royal family. So that's just I think Dr. Yue just kind of understood the reality of I am nobody, but I'm gonna do my damnedest to fight for the things that I love.
So you think he was a little bit in a, how do I put this? Ooh, we're getting into such dangerous territory here. But, historically, when the United States created the atomic bomb and then dropped it and was like, well, if we didn't make it,
someone else will.
The Nazis were, and they were going to do worse with it. Do you think that he was kind of feeling similar, where he might have been feeling like, if I don't do this and also slightly try and do it better because he's trying to save Jessica and Paul, that he thinks that someone else is going to do it anyways, and then probably the whole family would have died?
Yeah, I think so, because if he couldn't find it in this doctor, he would have found it in somebody else. Because the Harkonnen and the Emperor are plotting this together, right? So they basically just want to maintain their power and get rid of anybody who's going to oppose them. But you got to remember that obviously it is a plot device in order to send Paul into the Fremen culture. So that's the whole start of his Messiah thing. So obviously without that, wouldn't have pushed him to be in the aid of the Fremen. So while it is a good plot device, I think it's a really good representation of the things that happen in politics and in war.
Yeah, and kind of what you were talking about earlier as well, as far as the hero complex being complex.
Yeah, and he honestly did what he could. I mean, he didn't want to kill Leto, but he did give Leto a chance to kill the Baron. So I think he had made plans within plans if things didn't go his way. Obviously, that's why he gave Leto the poison capsule in his teeth or whatever. So I think he just understood the reality of things, but he's just not going to ignore any chance to save his wife, because otherwise, what's the point in living, kind of thing. You'll see that that's a really big thing between Paula and Chani as well, and in other later romantic relationships, which I will not disclose at this time because that's spoilers.
Spoiler.
But yeah, it's such a big thing. But the whole point is this whole cycle of rebirth. And a big plot point are the Golas, which are just basically not reincarnations of people, but they basically just make people. And that's a big plot point, which I hope that they get to, but they probably won't, because I think that whole thing happens in Dune Messiah, but it is a really big plot point. So to kind of give you context, it's just this whole cycle of rebirth and fighting for people that you love is a really big theme. So I think that's probably just a smidgen version of that.
Yeah.
To give a brief nutshell of that character analysis, it's just, I don't think it's anything super complicated, but to understand that he's a simple man in a complicated world.
Yeah, I get that.
The best way to define that.
Or not in that same scene, but very close to that same scene, in the Denis 2021, the Duke gets the chance to tooth spray the Baron because, he kind of lures him closer and bites the tooth so that the poison spray leaks out towards the Baron. And the Baron does have a shield on, so he ultimately is fine, but he has that moment. In the 84, it's a little different. In the 84, he tooth sprays the Baron's assistant. He doesn't get to the Baron directly. And I'm just wondering, because this was a part that I didn't read in the book. How did it go in the book?
I think it was everybody in that room, if I remember correctly. I think he had I think that was a Mentat assistant, because every royal house, I think, has Mentats, which anyone who doesn't know what that is, they're basically human computers. Leto's Mentat was Hawat. He was I can't remember the name of the actor.
Was he the guy who, flipped his eyes back and was like, it's going to cost them $1 billion? Okay.
Yeah, it'll take him this amount of time to travel this much space. Yeah, he's his eyes kind of flutter and he does calculations in his head. But Mentats are basically human computers, so they just do math very well, pretty much.
Nice.
Yeah, so where was I going with this? Oh, the Duke Harkonnen has a mentat of his own called Piter, I think is his name, and I think he also dies in that same room. So I think that's the way it was in the book.
Okay.
If I remember.
I mean, it kind of all mostly played the same. The only real difference was that in the new movie, he had the chance to spray the Baron directly, whereas again in the 84 he sprayed the assistant. And it did leak a little bit around the room, but yeah.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that his mentat dies because Leto's Hawa, I think, becomes Harkonnen's mentat, if I remember correctly. I don't know what the significance of that would be to change that. I just remember that he killed everybody in that room, but the Baron had his shield on, so he was pretty much fine.
That tracks. Yeah. Is there anything that was very obviously missing from the book in this new movie?
To be honest, no. I'm trying to think.
Because you know how in Hunger Games, the Hunger Games movie, the first one is a very solid adaptation. And one of the big things people talk about a lot, and I talk about a lot, is the fact that the Mockingjay pin, the way that Katniss got it was different, that kind of thing. Is there anything, it might not be the biggest plot point, but is something significant enough that you're this was done differently in the movie or wasn't done at all in the movie?
No. Honestly, I remember watching it for the first time, the new adaptation, and I was literally on the edge of my seat. People say that all the time about when they see movies, but me and Zach were just doing this the whole time because this was basically how I imagined it when I was reading the books growing up. And I don't think anything was really left out other than, I think some things were added in terms of effects and how Paul experiences visions and stuff like that. Might be a little different, but to be honest, I think it was pretty spot on.
Nice.
As far as part 1 is considered, part 2, I have no idea, but I hope to God that there's not anything missing in that. But he's got 3 hours to do it, so.
Dang. Wait, 3 hours? Do we already know the runtime?
No, but I would assume it's going to be close to the first one, which I think was 2 hours and 40 minutes.
2 hours and 48 minutes was the first one. And Dune Part 2 runtime is going to be 2 hours and 46 minutes. So about the same.
That's a lot, because a lot happens in the second half of Dune.
Yeah.
So much. There's a lot of little details in there that I hope he doesn't overlook, but I can understand, because film industry, you kind of have to weigh pros and cons of, does this really add to the story, or does it take away? But I hope that he still has a book around with him as a reference point, because
yeah, that is really cool.
I mean, otherwise, what are you doing?
Yeah.
So I'm glad that he's staying true to hopefully how Frank Herbert had envisioned it. But I just remember watching it and being this is how I imagined it, and just comparing it to all the other adaptations. It's just you can't really compare them because they're just two totally different time periods in which they've been shot.
So many differences in the resources that you have available to tell a story.
Yeah. And to just have it in IMAX even is just
yes. And the popcorn bucket in 84 you couldn't have, actually honestly in 1984 you could probably have a popcorn bucket like that. It feels very of the time. But aren't we so lucky that the year is 2024, the second Dune movie is coming out, and we have the most ridiculous and just stupid popcorn bucket ever.
Do you have it?
I don't have it. I will purchase it. When we go in a second to my pop quiz, I was going to jokingly ask you, true or false, will I, Kim Labick, purchase a Dune popcorn bucket? And the answer is true.
Yeah, we live in the universe that, yes, you would buy that, for sure.
Yeah.
Oh, man, I just can't. I don't like reaching into things.
Oh, I'm definitely going to take the top off. I'm definitely for popcorn uses. I'm going to take the popcorn lid off.
Don't tell me that's a sanitary product, because that is one. I would not be sharing that with anybody if I was using it, if that makes sense. If I had kids, I was get your hands out of my popcorn bucket, because that's disgusting. Even just having other people's hands in it, it's just bleh.
Absolutely.
Please take the top off. I don't want you to get sick. How do you even clean it?
I don't know. And it seems like one of those things, I think I'm probably going to be the kind of person who plays too much with the little rubbery spikes and ends up pulling them off and breaking them.
Pull them off.
Yeah.
It would have been better to just have them as small spikes around it. I get it, but come on.
Yeah. I
You're still
completely agree.
putting your hand inside of a worm, I'm sure which is kind of funny that they invented it that way because in a way it's kind of foreshadowing, but I'm not going to tell you why.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. Not for Dune Part 2 and not even for Dune Messiah, but for Children of Dune, for sure.
Oh no. Oh,
but I'm kind of like,
does that mean no spoilers? Does that mean
it's not anything bad. It's more like, oh, okay, well, cool. I guess that's going to happen.
So I guess now is the perfect time for our pop quiz. And yes, guys, it took me this long to realize that I could call it a pop quiz because the whole show is movie theater butter, like popcorn, pop quiz. I've just been being like, let's do trivia. Anyways, it is time for a movie theater butter pop quiz. So, Tawny,
Let's do it.
I have 2 questions for you. It's not super deep trivia or anything. So, first question, how much in millions of dollars was the budget for Denis Villeneuve's Dune Part 1?
Is this multiple choice or do I have to guess?
You can guess, but I'll give it to you if you're within like 25.
So shot for IMAX. So obviously you're using the most expensive Arri camera. With Panavision glass, I'm guessing. So with that kind of scope, probably 250 million.
That's a pretty solid guess. It landed at about 165 million, but you're pretty close as far as that goes.
I'm not gonna be surprised though to hear that part 2 of Dune is probably gonna be a little bit more than that, but
probably when it lands on it.
Did it recuperate box office?
So that's my second question. So here's the part 2 of the question. So how much in millions has Dune Part 1 grossed globally? The budget again was 165.
You know, most epics barely kind of make them. I'm so tempted to like cheat, but I know I won't. I want to say it made its budget, but not by much. So maybe like 180?
Okay. It definitely outdid that by a lot. Dune Part 1 globally grossed $434 million.
That's not even close. What are you talking about?
I don't know. When you're
Holy
talking in millions,
shit.
Everything feels the same.
Man. Well, that just goes to show how much faith I have in Denis, but
yeah.
That's a crazy amount of money.
That is a lot
Can't even
of
imagine.
Money. A lot of money. Last question I have for you as we start wrapping this up is how do you think this film is best watched? Some kind of examples could be you think it's better in a theater, in IMAX, on a plane, on your phone, on a laptop, with friends, without friends. Any detail you think that makes the perfect movie watching experience for Dune Part 1.
So, I don't want to be a film snob and say IMAX, but
IMAX. Yeah.
Because to kind of match the scope of how big this story is and how vast and expansive it can be, I think that accurately reflects how it feels, because the first thing that you hear is an alien language talking to you, and I think it's a black screen, and then it has subtitles of what it's saying in that alien language. And whoever did the sound design for that deserves everything.
Yeah.
Because what do you even decide is the first thing that happens that you see in Dune? It's not going to be of the sand dunes. It's not going to be Paul. It's not going to be of anything. It's literally sound design. And just to hear that alien language, let me see what the quote was. Dreams are messages from the... So hearing that against your eardrums in this alien language is very guttural and very visceral, but it's also very clear, and it gave me this feeling of like, this shit's for real. This is exactly how I wanted to feel when I wanted to watch this movie. Like, I had no idea how, like, I didn't watch spoilers or trailers of any kind before I went to go see the movie because I wanted to be surprised, other than obviously seeing Timothée Chalamet and posters and shit.
Yeah.
But I think that's the most interesting thing to start with, is a quote, which is probably from the book, but like just hearing that really just set the tone for the rest of the movie. And like you said, it's a very serious film. Like, there's not a lot of witty banter or anything like that. It's very much a story about mankind from start to finish and how we should be experiencing reality in this life that we're living in. So I think it's just very beneficial for everyone to see Dune in theater. You're seeing it as it's intended to be seen.
Yeah, just like Christopher Nolan intended.
Yeah. Not to be a snob about IMAX, but it is the closest thing to how humans experience vision. So that's why they have all these large format cameras and why they're so really trying to get into like this 6K, 8K.
Yeah.
So obviously like more resolution, more information, and the more data you have, but it's the closest thing to how we experience the world. So IMAX, theater, for sure. It is a really long-winded answer, but
it's good. You get really into it, and you're very passionate about this story, and I love that.
It's such an interesting thing to start with. Like, imagine being in the room with Denny, and they're like, okay, what shot are we starting this with? Because it'll set the tone for everything, including the movies that you make after.
Yeah.
So it's like, when you said they started with Irulan, and she's staring at you,
yeah.
right?
Just being like, hello, welcome to Dune.
Yeah. Like, it's like 4,000 years later, and you're watching an old clip of some lady talking about the past, right? And it's like, oh, maybe that's why he did it, because in the Dune books, they have little excerpts from journals of people, and most of them are from Irulan. That's probably why.
Oh, that's really cool.
Sorry.
No, you're fine.
Figured that-
That's really cool.
Yeah, I think there are excerpts, and it's like some little snippet about like the world, and Brandon Sanderson also does that with his books, although his are more confusing because you're like, what the fuck does that have to do with what I'm reading about? But that totally makes sense. But to see that, like a white woman talking to you about some character or some past or whatever, is not as impactful as creating a sound design and having somebody voice the line and then affecting that, and then just what an incredible way to start a film about something that's like, I don't know, it just really takes you out of where you are currently in your reality and puts it into theirs.
Yes.
So
immersion in film, I love it. It really is like it's not snobby at all, but it really is the best way to watch so many films, especially something of this magnitude. So I completely agree. I think this film is best watched in IMAX if you can, but at the very least in theaters. Get yourself immersed in it. Because like I said, I mean, you know, I rewatched this again a little while ago and I wasn't fully paying attention. And we all do that all the times. I get it. Like, no harm, no foul. It's gonna happen. Just if you really want to feel a film, the immersion makes so much of a difference, because it's the difference between you are there in the story versus it's just some kind of sound and colors in the background.
Yeah. The difference is so stark. So to have that be a huge part in Dune, on top of the cinematography and on top of like all the VFX and how everything is laid out and put in this cohesive unit, is just an incredible feat. And Greg Fraser, who's the DP, is very, very good at what he does. Funny, because I also edited an interview with Zeiss about his co-DP for The Creator. I don't know if you've seen that.
Ooh, not yet. It looks really good, though.
Yeah, that's another sci-fi, but with that one, it's literally like 90% of it is VFX, and everything else is just, set design, or like costume design and all that. Yeah, so that one's really cool, but Greg Fraser used to be the DP on that before he had to go and do Dune. So he had a co-DP that basically finished the rest of that movie, but you can see the similarities from that movie and from Dune. The difference, obviously, is the story and the type of sci-fi that it is, but to just see if you watch the cinematography, it's so different than Dune. I just think Dune is so human-focused, and not that other films aren't, it's just that's the point of the story, and the theme is human connection and the story of mankind from start to finish. So I think Greg Fraser really understands the human face and really understands how to frame it in a way that's like really pulls you in, but you're sort of detached from it enough to like kind of understand what's going on, but also you just relate to the characters, and I'm just excited to see more of it. So
yes.
I hope other people are too. Obviously it is with that box office.
Oh yeah. I have a feeling, I mean, the numbers are going to climb for this one, I think. And
I hope so.
I'm excited for it. I know you're excited for it. I know a ton of people who are ready to go see that movie. And let alone that popcorn bucket is going to draw a crowd. So we've got this. Like, they're going to make a lot of money on this. And I hope, I hope it's a great story. I hope it's very well done. I hope we all have a fun time. As much of a fun time, if not more, than we did with Dune Part One.
100%. I hope so too.
Yeah. Well, Thank you, Tawny. Very, very glad we could finally do this. You and I have been trying to record about Dune for a while, and I'm glad we finally got around to it. Just in time before the second one comes out, and we'll do it all again.
Yeah, we'll do it all again, and we'll point out if there's any inconsistencies, but I'm really hoping that there's not.
Yeah, honestly, me too. But yeah, again, thank you so much. I'm very grateful to have you on this, not only because of your passion for this story, but also because you work in the industry as well, and you have that insight to, go off on this beautiful rant about the sound design and all of that stuff. I love this. I love all my friends who are film people and who aren't film people, but I think with this story specifically, it was great to have someone talk about it who can have more of the insight on the details of how these storytelling techniques really brought this story to life. So thank you so much, Tawny.
Of course.
May thy knife chip and shatter, and we'll see you in, a couple of weeks for Dune Part 2.
Yeah.
Hell
awesome.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like that's a wrap. Thank you for listening to Movie Theater Butter, a Tilkin Productions podcast, edited by Kevin Matthew Keeling of Take the World. If you have a free moment, we'd really appreciate if you like or follow the podcast from wherever you're listening. It'll really help us grow our audience and be able to continue making episodes for you guys. You can also follow us on Instagram for monthly episode schedules, extra content, and even surprise video episodes. All right, I'm done. See you next episode.